Farmer pleaded with God for food, but gets a surprise when he wakes. Thomas Harrison Mitchell was at the end of his strength. The drought that had been punishing the interior of Kentucky for 8 months had consumed his last reserves of hope, just as it had consumed his crops and decimated his herd. On that Thursday night, kneeling in the yard of the small property he had inherited from his father, the 65-year-old man raised his eyes to the starry sky and whispered a desperate prayer. His tears fell on the cracked earth as he pleaded for a miracle that would bring food to his table and water for the few animals that still held on. "Lord, I can't bear to see my little cow Daisy thirsty, nor my dog Thunder going hungry," he murmured, his voice choked. "If you can give me a chance, any chance to get something to eat, I promise I will help everyone in need." The hot wind from the scrubland was the only answer he received that night. Thomas got up with difficulty, his back aching from the long hours working under the relentless sun, trying to save what remained of his corn crop. He went inside and lay down on the thin mattress, unable to sleep properly because of hunger and worry. The next morning he woke before sunrise with a strange feeling. During his dream, he had seen his late grandfather, Walter, waving to him near the old stone watering trough at the back of the property. The old man was pointing insistently in that direction, as if he wanted to show something important. Thomas shook his head, trying to dismiss what he considered just the imagination of a tired and hungry mind. But the image from the dream remained vivid in his memory. He decided to walk to the watering trough to check if there was any problem with the stone structure his grandfather had built decades ago. The circular trough, made of stones fitted together with perfect craftsmanship, had always been a source of family pride. Even in the driest times, a small amount of water usually accumulated there, coming from a deep water table. But now, for the first time Thomas could remember, it was completely dry. He knelt to examine the stones more closely, looking for cracks that might explain the water leaking away. It was then that he noticed one of the stones at the base was slightly out of alignment, as if it had been moved recently. Curious, he tried to push it back into place. The stone gave way easily, revealing a dark gap behind it. Thomas's heart raced. He had never seen that space before, and he had worked on that property since he was a child. With trembling hands, he managed to move a few more stones, widening the opening enough to look inside. His eyes widened when he saw inside the dark compartment a metallic object covered by a thick cloth. Carefully, he managed to pull the bundle out. It was heavy and rectangular in shape. When he removed the cloth, he almost fell backward in surprise. Before him was an old metal box, clearly handmade with ornamental details that suggested it was created by a skilled blacksmith. The box was locked, but the lock seemed fragile after so many years. Thomas looked around as if expecting someone to appear and explain this mystery. With his heart pounding, he took the box inside and placed it on the kitchen table. He grabbed a small hammer and with careful blows managed to break the old lock. When he opened the lid, he had to hold onto the chair to keep from fainting. Inside the box were documents yellowed with time, some old photographs, some gold coins, and a sealed envelope with the words, "For my grandson Thomas," written in the unmistakable handwriting of his grandfather Walter. His hands were shaking so much he could barely hold the envelope. He opened it slowly and began to read the letter that would change his life forever. "My dear grandson, if you are reading this, it is because God wanted you to find what I hid for our family. These lands you call our small property are actually just a part of what truly belongs to us. Your great-grandfather, my father, was the owner of a much larger area, which extends to where the city center is today. But greedy men managed to steal our original documents and registered the lands in their names. In this box is the proof that we are the true owners. Use it wisely, my son, and do not let them steal what is ours." Thomas reread the letter 3 times before he could process what was written. He picked up the documents carefully and, even without fully understanding the legal terms, managed to identify names of places he knew well. The descriptions of the boundaries matched exactly with landmarks he saw every day. According to the papers, the family property extended for almost 2 kilometers in each direction, including the area where the busy commercial center of the town of St. Benedict Fields now operated. It was impossible. How could something like that have happened without anyone knowing? He examined the old photographs, and recognized his great-grandfather in some of them, always alongside well-dressed men, apparently signing documents. One photo showed a wooden sign with the words, "St. Margaret's Farm, property of the Harrison family," planted exactly where the town's largest supermarket now stood. The gold coins, though few, represented more money than Thomas had ever seen together in his entire life. But it was the documents that truly mattered. If they were real, his financial situation was about to change drastically. If they were fake, at least the coins could help him survive a few more months. Thomas put everything back in the box and hid it under his bed. He needed to think calmly about what to do. He couldn't just show up in town claiming to own half the commercial establishments. People would think he had gone mad from hunger and thirst. That afternoon he walked around the property looking at it with new eyes. Every fence, every tree, every stone seemed to have a different story now. If his grandfather was right, he wasn't just a struggling small farmer, but the rightful heir to a considerable fortune. But who could help him discover if the documents were authentic? Thomas only knew the town lawyer, Dr. Richard Caldwell, who had always been cordial to him, but mainly worked for the wealthier merchants in the area. Would he be the right person to trust with a secret this big? That night Thomas could barely sleep. His mind was buzzing with possibilities and doubts. What if the documents were real? How to explain that his family had lived in poverty for generations, while others profited from their lands? What if they were fake? How would he bear the disappointment after nurturing such hope? On Saturday morning, he decided he needed more information before taking any action. He remembered that Mrs. Dorothy, the oldest woman in the area, always talked about the old days and knew many stories about the pioneer families. Perhaps she knew something about his great-grandfather. Thomas walked to Mrs. Dorothy's house, a simple but well-kept building at the town's entrance. The 87-year-old woman was sitting on the porch shelling beans when she saw him approach. "Good morning, Mrs. Dorothy. Do you have a few minutes to talk with me?" "Of course, my boy. Sit here in the shade. You look like you haven't slept well." Thomas settled into the wooden chair beside her, nervous about how to approach the subject without revealing too much. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you remember my great-grandfather, William Harrison?" The lady's eyes lit up at the memory. "Your great-grandfather? Of course I remember. He was a very hard-working man, had a large property here in the region. My father always spoke of him with great respect. Do you know what happened to his lands?" Mrs. Dorothy stopped shelling the beans and looked at Thomas with a thoughtful expression. "Son, that's a sad story. Your great-grandfather was tricked by some men from the capital. They showed up here saying there were problems with the land deeds, that they needed to get everything sorted out at the county offices. William, who was an honest man, handed over all the papers for them to fix." Thomas's heart raced. The story matched what was written in his grandfather's letter. "And then?" "Then they never came back. When your great-grandfather went after them, he discovered they had registered the lands in their own names. They sued your great-grandfather, claiming he was a squatter. Since he no longer had the original documents, he lost everything in court. But that's impossible. How can they steal a person's land like that?" Mrs. Dorothy sighed deeply. "My boy, in those days, justice worked differently. Those with money and knowledge always won. Your great-grandfather was a simple man, didn't know how to handle these legal matters. He ended up keeping only the little plot where you all live to this day." Thomas felt his blood boil in his veins. His family had been victims of a fraud that lasted decades, passing down from generation to generation the poverty that should have been prosperity. "Do you know who these men were?" "One of them was the father of the current Dr. Richard, the town lawyer. The other was the grandfather of Colonel Vincent, the one who owns half the businesses around here." The information hit Thomas like a punch to the gut. The lawyer he was thinking of consulting was the son of one of the men who had stolen his land. And Colonel Vincent, the most powerful businessman in the region, was also involved in the original fraud. "Mrs. Dorothy, are you sure about this?" "Absolutely, son. My father witnessed some of their conversations. He always said the truth would come out one day, but he ended up taking that secret to the grave. I never told anyone because I thought it wouldn't do any good." Thomas thanked her and went home with his mind reeling. Now he had confirmation that his grandfather's story was true, but he also knew he would face powerful enemies if he tried to reclaim his lands. The very lawyer who could help him was the son of one of the criminals, and the richest businessman in the region had an interest in keeping the secret buried. That afternoon he decided to examine the documents more carefully. He managed to identify several signatures and stamps that seemed authentic. There was also a hand-drawn map showing exactly the boundaries of the original property. Everything matched what Mrs. Dorothy had told him, but how to proceed? If he went to Dr. Richard, he risked handing the evidence over to the criminal's son. If he did nothing, he would continue living in poverty, while others benefited from the theft committed against his family. It was then that he remembered his daughter, Rebecca. She had graduated from law school a few years back and worked at a firm in the capital. Thomas and Rebecca hadn't spoken in almost 2 years after a terrible argument about their mother's inheritance. Rebecca thought her father had hidden money when his wife passed away, and she had left home accusing him of selfishness. The truth was there was no money to hide. Thomas had even sold his wedding ring to pay for his wife's medicine during the long illness that took her. But Rebecca hadn't believed him, and the hurt had created a chasm between father and daughter. Now, ironically, he had discovered that there really was a family inheritance, an inheritance far greater than Rebecca could ever have imagined. The question was, would she believe him this time? Thomas picked up the old telephone and dialed the number he still knew by heart. On the other end of the line, Rebecca's familiar voice sounded cold when she realized who was calling. "Father, is something wrong?" "Rebecca, my daughter, I need to talk to you about something very important. Can you come here this weekend?" "Father, I already told you I don't want to argue about Mother's inheritance anymore. You hid her money, and I know it." "Rebecca, please listen to me. It's not about your mother's money. It's about something I discovered, something that could change our lives completely." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Thomas thought she had hung up. "All right, Father, but I can only come on Sunday, and I don't want to waste my time with more lies." When Rebecca hung up, Thomas stared at the phone for long minutes. He knew he had only one chance to regain his daughter's trust. If she didn't believe the documents, he would lose not only the opportunity to reclaim the land, but also any hope of having his family united again. The next few days passed slowly. Thomas re-examined each document dozens of times, memorizing every detail, every signature, every stamp. He organized everything chronologically and mentally rehearsed how he would present the discovery to Rebecca. On Sunday morning, he saw his daughter's car raising dust on the dirt road leading to his house. Rebecca got out of the vehicle with a serious expression, wearing a dark suit that made her seem even more distant from the rural environment where she had grown up. "Hi, Dad," she greeted coldly. "Rebecca, my dear daughter. Come in, let's have some coffee." She entered the simple house where she had grown up and looked around with an expression mixing nostalgia and sadness. Thomas prepared the coffee in silence, gathering courage to start a conversation he knew was crucial. "Rebecca, before I show you what I discovered, I want to apologize for everything that happened between us." "Father, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. You're all I have left in this world. Your mother always said that one day you would understand that I did the best I could with the little we had. But I could never convince you of that." Rebecca lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Father, you said you discovered something important." Thomas took a deep breath and went to get the box from under the bed. He placed it on the table between them and told the whole story, from the dream about his grandfather to the conversation with Mrs. Dorothy. Rebecca listened with a skeptical expression, but Thomas noticed her interest growing with each new detail. When he opened the box and showed the documents, Rebecca picked up the papers with the hands of someone who knew the legal value of every written word. She examined each document with professional attention, checking signatures, stamps, and dates. "Father, if this is true, our family has been the victim of one of the biggest land frauds I've ever seen." "So you believe the documents are genuine?" "They seem authentic, but I would need a more detailed analysis. Some of these signatures and stamps are from agencies that don't even exist anymore. It would be hard to fake with such precision. For the first time in years, Thomas saw a glimmer of hope in his daughter's eyes. "Rebecca, can you help me recover what is ours?" She was silent for a few minutes, studying the hand-drawn map and comparing it with her memory of the local geography. "Father, this is going to be a very difficult battle. We're talking about properties worth millions of dollars today. Colonel Vincent and the others aren't just going to hand everything over because we show up with old documents. But they are legitimate documents, aren't they? They seem to be, but they will try to disqualify them in every way possible. They'll claim forgery, statute of limitations, adverse possession, anything to keep what they have." Thomas felt discouragement take hold of him again. Perhaps it was better to forget everything and just sell the gold coins to survive a few more months. Rebecca noticed the change in her father's expression. "Dad, I didn't say it was impossible. I said it would be difficult. But if these documents are real, we have a right to these lands, and I will fight by your side to recover them." Thomas felt his eyes fill with tears. For the first time in 2 years, his daughter had said, "we," referring to the two of them. "Do you forgive me, Rebecca, for everything that happened?" "Dad, perhaps I was unfair to you. Perhaps Mom really did hide some things to protect us. Let's discover the truth together." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot, as we are just starting out. Now continuing. Rebecca spent the rest of Sunday photographing all the documents and making detailed notes. She explained to her father that the first step would be to authenticate the papers through handwriting analysis and paper and ink examination. Then they would need to research historical records in the county clerk's offices to find evidence of the fraud. "Dad, you have to prepare yourself psychologically. This process could take years and will stir up a lot of powerful people. They won't make anything easy for us." "I am ready, daughter. I've lived 65 years without knowing the truth. I'd rather die fighting than live in ignorance." On Monday, Rebecca called the office where she worked in Charlotte and requested a 3-month leave. She explained to the partners that she had discovered a family matter that required her immediate attention. As she was one of the firm's best lawyers, she managed to negotiate working remotely on some cases while dedicating herself to the land claim process. The first obstacle appeared when they tried to schedule the document examination. The handwriting expert recommended by the local court was close to Dr. Richard Caldwell, which immediately raised suspicions. Rebecca decided to hire an independent expert from Charlotte, even though it cost more. The results of the examination, delivered a week later, confirmed that the documents were authentic. The paper, ink, and signatures matched the indicated historical period. There were no signs of forgery or tampering. Rebecca felt a mix of euphoria and apprehension. Now they had technical proof, but they were also certain they would face a legal war. The next step was to research the county clerk's offices in the region. Rebecca discovered that many old records had been lost over the years, always coincidentally those that could prove the original ownership of the Harrison family. But some documents had survived, hidden in dead archives that no one had consulted for decades. It was during this research that Rebecca found the first definitive proof of the fraud. In a 1952 record, there was a marginal note made by a clerk. Original owner William Harrison alleges theft of original documents, requests investigation. The note had never been followed by any legal action. With this discovery, Rebecca understood that the fraud had not been just an isolated scheme, but a carefully planned one that relied on the complicity of public officials. Dr. Richard's father had not only stolen the documents, but had also corrupted the system to ensure the fraud was never discovered. That night, Rebecca was organizing the documents on the kitchen table when she heard the sound of cars approaching. It was almost 10 at night, a time when there was rarely any activity in that rural area. Thomas went to the window and saw 3 cars parked at the entrance to his property. "Rebecca, I think we have visitors." 5 men got out of the vehicles and walked toward the house. At the front was Colonel Vincent, a burly man around 60 years old, known for his political and economic influence in the region. Beside him was Dr. Richard Caldwell and 3 other men whom Rebecca did not recognize. Thomas opened the door before they knocked. "Good evening, Colonel. What a surprise to see you here. Thomas, my friend, we need to talk. May I come in? The falsely cordial tone fooled no one. Rebecca positioned herself beside her father, making it clear she was not intimidated by the unexpected visit. Of course, come in. This is my daughter, Rebecca, an attorney. Colonel Vincent greeted Rebecca with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A pleasure, Counselor. I heard you've been digging into old papers, researching family history. Very interesting. And how did you hear about that? Rebecca asked directly. Dr. Richard stepped forward to answer. Counselor, this is a small town. When someone shows up at the county clerk's office asking for old documents on the Harrison family, word spreads quickly. Rebecca understood her research had been monitored from the start. There were probably informants in the clerk's offices reporting any suspicious activity. And what is your interest in our family history? Thomas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The colonel sat down without being invited, and gestured for the others to do the same. Thomas, you are a hard-working, honest man. I've always respected you and your family, but it seems someone is putting strange ideas in your head. What kind of ideas? Ideas about land, property, things that happened a long time ago and are best left in the past. Rebecca felt her blood boil. Colonel, if there are documents proving someone's legitimate ownership, that is not a thing of the past. That is an established right. Counselor, I'll be frank with you. In this region, many families have similar stories. If we start reviewing all the old records, we'll create chaos that will hurt everyone. Everyone? Or just those who benefited illegally from other people's land? The mood in the room grew tense. The three men Rebecca didn't know shifted restlessly in their chairs, and she realized they were probably hired thugs brought to intimidate. Dr. Richard tried to smooth things over. Thomas, Rebecca, you are intelligent people. You know a legal battle will cost a lot of money and could last years. Even if you win, you'll spend a fortune on lawyers and experts. And what is your proposal? Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. The colonel smiled again. A fair proposal. Thomas, I'll buy your current property for a very good price, above market value. You can move to the city, have a more comfortable life, and forget all this business about old documents. And if we refuse? Well, why would you refuse? It's a generous offer. Rebecca stood up from her chair. Colonel, you're trying to buy our property precisely because you know it's part of a much larger area that rightfully belongs to us. That's not a fair proposal. It's an attempt to silence us. The colonel also stood, and his mask of cordiality began to slip. Counselor, you are young. Perhaps you don't understand how things work here. Some battles aren't worth fighting. This one is, Rebecca replied without hesitation. Is that so? And are you sure you want to expose your father to all the risks a legal war can bring? The threat was clear. Thomas felt his heart race, but Rebecca remained firm. Colonel, it's 2024, not 1952. Intimidation and threats are crimes, and I am an attorney. I know very well how to document everything that is happening here. Dr. Richard made a discreet signal to the colonel, who took a deep breath and sat back down. Counselor, there is no threat whatsoever. We're simply offering a friendly solution to a problem that could become very complicated for everyone. The friendly solution would be for you to recognize our rights and negotiate fair compensation for the years of improper use of the land. That's impossible, Dr. Richard intervened. Even if these documents are authentic, there are issues of statutes of limitations, adverse possession, improvements made. All issues will resolve in court, Rebecca cut in. The colonel stood up again, this time clearly irritated. Very well, you've chosen the harder path. But don't say I didn't offer a peaceful alternative. When the visitors left, Rebecca immediately picked up the phone and called a professional colleague in Charlotte who had experience with intimidation cases. Paul, I need to document an attempted coercion. Can you guide me on the procedures? Thomas watched her with a mixture of pride and worry. Rebecca, are you sure this is what you want to do? These men are dangerous. Father, that's exactly why we can't back down. If we give in now, they'll know they can intimidate anyone who threatens their interests. The next morning, Rebecca drafted a detailed initial petition attaching all the authenticated documents and requesting the repossession of the lands historically belonging to the Harrison family. She also filed a police report about the intimidation attempt from the previous night. The lawsuit was filed at the St. Benedict Fields Courthouse on a Tuesday morning. That afternoon, Thomas's phone rang. It was the local bank manager, informing him that a problem had arisen with Thomas's bank account. According to him, there were suspicions of irregularities that needed to be investigated. Meanwhile, the account would be frozen. Rebecca immediately realized it was retaliation. Thomas had maintained the same bank account for over 20 years, had never had any problems, and now, coincidentally the day after the lawsuit was filed, irregularities appeared. "Father, they're trying to pressure us financially. They're going to make our lives impossible while the lawsuit is in progress. And what do? We resist, and we document every attempt at sabotage." During the following weeks, Thomas's life became a living hell. The animal feed supplier said he could no longer deliver to the property due to logistical problems. The technician from the agricultural cooperative cancelled the scheduled visit to evaluate the crops. Even the small market where Thomas had shopped for years began treating him coldly. Rebecca realized they were being socially isolated as a strategy to force them to drop the lawsuit, but she also noticed that not everyone in the community was against them. Some people, mainly the older ones, began discreetly seeking out Thomas to tell similar stories about their own families. That's how she met Mr. Harold, a 78-year-old man who lived on the outskirts of town. He sought out Thomas one Sunday morning right after Mass. "Thomas, can I speak with you privately?" They walked to an isolated spot behind the church. "Thomas, I heard about what you're stirring up. I wanted to say that my father was also cheated by Dr. Richard's father." "How so, Mr. Harold?" "My father had a good piece of land, where the town's main gas station is today. The same men appeared with the same story about regularizing documents. My father handed over the papers and never saw hide nor hair of them again." Thomas felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at the confirmation that the fraud had been even greater than he imagined. Relief because they were not alone in this fight. "Mr. Harold, do you have any proof of this?" "I have better than proof. I have a witness. My mother, who is now 95, witnessed the whole negotiation. She still has a good head on her shoulders and remembers every detail." Rebecca was euphoric when she learned of the existence of a living witness to the crimes committed decades ago. They scheduled a visit for the following week, but when they arrived at the family home of Mr. Harold, they discovered the elderly woman had been urgently hospitalized the day before. "She suddenly fell ill," explained Mr. Harold's daughter. "The doctors said it was a heart attack, but she always had a strong heart." Rebecca and Thomas exchanged worried looks, yet another suspiciously convenient coincidence for their adversaries. At the hospital, they managed to speak briefly with the elderly woman, who was conscious but very weak. Between whispers, she confirmed her son's version about the fraud involving the family lands. "My dear," she said to Rebecca, "be very careful. These men are capable of anything to keep their secrets." 3 days later, the woman passed away. Officially, it was a complication from the heart attack, but Rebecca and Thomas couldn't shake the suspicion that the only living witness to the crimes had been silenced. The legal proceedings were advancing slowly, as Rebecca had predicted. At every hearing, Colonel Vincent's lawyers presented new arguments to disqualify the Harrison family's documents. They alleged forgery, statute of limitations, adverse possession, and even questioned the local court's jurisdiction to judge the case. Dr. Richard, who officially did not represent either party but clearly coordinated the defendant's defense, managed to secure several procedural delays. Rebecca realized the strategy was to prolong the process until she and her father grew tired or ran out of financial resources. It was then that they received an unexpected visit. On Thursday morning, a young lawyer knocked on Thomas's door. He couldn't have been more than 30, was well dressed, but drove a simple car and had a hesitant expression. "Good morning. Are you Thomas Harrison Mitchell?" "Yes, I am. How can I help you?" "My name is Daniel Foster. I'm a lawyer here in the region. I'd like to talk about the lawsuit you filed against Colonel Vincent." Rebecca, who was in the kitchen, came to the door suspiciously. "And what is your interest in our case, Dr. Daniel?" The young man seemed to choose his words carefully. "May I come in? It's better we talk in private." Thomas invited him in, but Rebecca remained alert. They had already learned to be wary of any unexpected approach. Daniel settled in the living room and took a deep breath before speaking. "Dr. Rebecca, Dr. Thomas, I came here because I believe you have been victims of an injustice, and because I can help you." "How so?" "My grandfather was the clerk at the registry office at the time the irregularities with your lands happened. Before he passed, he told me some things that might be important for your case." Rebecca felt her heart race. "What kind of things?" "My grandfather always suspected something was wrong with the property records from that time. He saw documents being altered, signatures being forged, but he was just an employee and had no power to question his superiors." "And why are you coming to talk to us now?" Daniel hesitated again. "Because when my grandfather died, he left some documents with me. Documents he had secretly kept as a sort of insurance policy." "What kind of documents?" Rebecca asked, trying to control her anxiety. "Copies of the original records before the alterations. Correspondence between Dr. Richard's father and Colonel Vincent's grandfather. And some handwritten notes from my grandfather himself documenting the frauds he witnessed." Thomas stood up from his chair, so moved. "Young man, are you saying you have proof that our lands were stolen?" "I'm saying I have evidence that there was a systematic scheme of illegal land appropriation in the region, and that your family was one of the main victims." Rebecca, though hopeful, maintained her professional caution. "Dr. Daniel, why did your grandfather never report these irregularities when he was alive?" "Because he was afraid. Dr. Richard's father and the Colonel's grandfather were very powerful men. My grandfather had a family to support and knew he would be fired immediately if he said anything, but he always said that one day the truth would come out." "And are you willing to testify about this?" "More than that, I am willing to represent you pro bono in this lawsuit." Rebecca became suspicious of the offer. "Why would you do that?" Daniel lowered his eyes. "Because every time I see an injustice being perpetuated, I remember the burden my grandfather carried his entire life. He died feeling guilty for having been a silent accomplice to a crime. I don't want to carry the same burden." "And your documents? Can we see them?" "Of course, they're in my car." Daniel left and returned carrying an old leather briefcase. When he opened it, he revealed dozens of yellowed papers, copies of documents and handwritten notes. Rebecca examined everything with growing attention. The original records clearly showed that the Harrison family's property extended over a much larger area than was listed in the later documents. The correspondence revealed explicit conversations about how to resolve the problem of the original owners, and Daniel's grandfather's notes documented dates, times, and witnesses of various irregularities. "Dr. Daniel, these documents are extraordinary. Why did you never show them to anyone before?" "Because my grandfather made me promise that I would only use them if I found a family that had truly been harmed and was willing to fight for justice, regardless of the consequences." Rebecca looked at her father, who seemed to be trying to process everything that was happening. "Dad, with this evidence, our case becomes much stronger." Thomas nodded, but still had a question for Daniel. "Son, are you sure you want to get involved in this fight? They've tried to intimidate us several times. With you, it won't be any different." Daniel smiled for the first time since he had arrived. "Dr. Thomas, I went to law school precisely to fight injustices like this. If I can't help you, what kind of lawyer am I?" Rebecca still had doubts about completely trusting the young lawyer, but the documents he brought were crucial evidence. She decided to accept his help, but maintain total control over the lawsuit's strategy. "Dr. Daniel, I accept you working with us, but with a few conditions. First, all documents remain in my custody. Second, any strategic decision needs to be approved by me. Third, if at any point I suspect you are working against our interests, our partnership ends immediately." "I accept all the conditions, Doctor." With Daniel on the team, the dynamics of the lawsuit changed completely. He knew the local judicial system well and had access to information that Rebecca, as an out-of-town lawyer, wouldn't be able to obtain easily. The first strategy was to file a petition with the new documents, requesting the inclusion of the discovered evidence. Simultaneously, they filed a criminal investigation action against Dr. Richard's father, post-mortem, and Colonel Vincent's grandfather, also deceased, which would pave the way to question the legitimacy of all real estate transactions carried out by them at the time. The reaction was not long in coming. Richard requested an urgent hearing with the judge, claiming the new documents were crude forgeries. Colonel Vincent hired a law firm from Charlotte, specialized in complex rural property cases. But Daniel knew the workings of the county clerk's office well and suggested a strategy that caught their opponents off guard. They requested an examination of the original registry books, comparing the deeds from that time with the copies kept by Daniel's grandfather. The result was devastating for the defense. The examination confirmed that the official registry books had been altered, with pages torn out and replaced. The copies kept by Daniel's grandfather were of the original pages, proving there had been manipulation of the official records. With this evidence, the case took on a much larger dimension. It was no longer just a dispute between families, but a corruption scheme that had compromised the very integrity of the region's property registration system. The public prosecutor, who had initially remained neutral in the case, decided to open an official investigation into the irregularities at the registry office. This attracted the attention of the regional press, and the case began to be reported in local newspapers. That's when things really started to get difficult for Thomas and Rebecca. The social isolation they already faced intensified. Shopkeepers refused to serve them. The gas station claimed it had no fuel when they arrived. Even at church, some people avoided greeting them, but something unexpected also began to happen. Other families in the region began to seek out Daniel with similar stories. Apparently, the scheme of illegal land appropriation had been even more extensive than anyone had imagined. Mr. John Mitchell, a retired farmer, brought documents showing he had also lost his land to the same group. Mrs. Mary Elizabeth presented evidence that the lot where the town's main pharmacy operated had belonged to her family. One by one, the true original owners began to come forward. Daniel realized they had before them not just an isolated case, but a systematic pattern of crimes against property that had shaped the entire land structure of the region. He suggested turning the individual case of the Harrison family into a class action representing all the affected families. Rebecca initially resisted the idea. She wanted to keep the focus on her father's specific case, but when she saw the number of families that had been harmed, she understood that a class action could be more effective and would have greater impact. Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. The transformation of the lawsuit into a class action completely changed the landscape. Now it was no longer just a few farmers questioning old records, but dozens of families demanding justice for decades of dispossession. The regional press began to pay more attention to the case, and even newspapers from the state capital sent reporters to cover the story. Colonel Vincent, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, made one last attempt at negotiation. He scheduled a meeting with Rebecca and Daniel at the law firm he had hired in Charlotte. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon in the elegant downtown of the state capital. Rebecca and Daniel arrived at the imposing commercial building, already knowing this was a desperate attempt at a settlement. The firm occupied 2 entire floors, with a panoramic view of the city center. The ostentatious decor made it clear they were dealing with very well-funded adversaries. Dr. Christopher Montrose, senior partner of the firm and a renowned real estate law specialist, received them in a conference room that more closely resembled a modern art museum. Colonel Vincent was present, accompanied by Dr. Richard and 2 other men Rebecca did not recognize. Attorney Rebecca, Dr. Daniel, thank you for coming. Let's get straight to the point, began Dr. Christopher. My client is willing to make a substantial offer to resolve this impasse amicably. We're listening, Daniel replied. The colonel stepped forward. Rebecca, you're an intelligent young woman. You know that even if you win in court, it will take years to see any money. I'm offering 5 million reais, divided among all the families involved. Cash, no bureaucracy. Rebecca did quick calculations. $5 million divided among the 15 families that had joined the lawsuit would result in a little over 300,000 reais for each. It was considerable money for simple people, but a tiny fraction of the real value of the properties in question. Colonel, that offer isn't fair. The lands you occupy illegally are worth tens of millions nowadays, Dr. Christopher intervened. Doctor, you need to consider the procedural risks. Even with the documents you presented, there are complex issues of adverse possession, statutes of limitations, and improvements. A settlement is always more advantageous than judicial uncertainty. For you, certainly, Daniel retorted, but our clients are in no hurry. They prefer to wait for justice. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Dr. Richard, who had remained silent, decided to speak. Rebecca, you're putting your father in a very dangerous situation. Thomas is an elderly man. His health is fragile. All this stress could be very harmful to him. The veiled threat did not go unnoticed by Rebecca. Doctor, Richard, if anything happens to my father, you will be the first to be held responsible. There is no threat, only sincere concern. The meeting lasted 2 hours, but it was clear they would not reach an agreement. The colonel increased the offer to 8 million, then 10, but Rebecca and Daniel held their position. They wanted the full restitution of the properties, or compensation, that reflected the real value of the lands. On the way back to St. Benedict Fields, Rebecca was worried about the mention of her father's health. Daniel tried to reassure her. Rebecca, they're desperate. This attempt at a settlement shows they know they're going to lose the case. I hope you're right, but I'm going to increase my father's security. When they arrived at Thomas's property, they found the elderly man cheerfully tending to his small garden. He had managed to drill a new artesian well with the help of supportive neighbors, and water had begun to flow again. The few plants that had survived the drought were greening up. How was the meeting? Thomas asked. Rebecca told him about the offer and their refusal to accept it. You did right, my child. It's not a question of money. It's a question of justice. That night, Daniel stayed at Thomas's house at Rebecca's request, as she didn't want to leave her father alone after the veiled threats. It was a wise decision because around 2 in the morning, the three were awakened by the sound of cars circling the property. Daniel peered out the window and saw at least 4 vehicles with armed men prowling around the house. He immediately called emergency services and managed to speak to a sergeant he knew. Sergeant Peterson, this is Dr. Daniel. I'm at Mr. Thomas Harrison Mitchell's property, and there are armed men prowling around the house. We need urgent backup. Dr. Daniel, a patrol car is on its way. Are you safe inside the house? For now, yes, but there are several men and they are clearly trying to intimidate us. The patrol car arrived 15 minutes later, but the armed men had already disappeared. They left only a message scrawled on a piece of paper tacked to the door. Some problems are solved in other ways. Sergeant Peterson filed the police report and promised to increase patrols in the area, but Rebecca knew the protection would be limited. She decided it was time to make the case public more widely. The next morning, she called an investigative journalist from Charlotte who had shown interest in the case. They scheduled an interview for that very afternoon at Thomas's property to show where it all began with the discovery of the chest. The report aired 3 days later and had a greater impact than Rebecca expected. The title was The Century-Old Fraud: How Entire Families Lost Their Land in a Corruption Scheme in Rural Kentucky. The piece showed not only the Harrison family's case, but also other affected families, creating a broad overview of the situation. The media fallout brought immediate consequences. The Federal Public Ministry decided to open an investigation into the irregularities at the notary's office. The state court ordered the creation of a special commission to analyze all property records for the region made between 1950 and 1970. And several other families contacted Daniel reporting similar cases. But the exposure also brought risks. The week after the report aired, Rebecca had her car vandalized in the capital. The tires were slashed, the windows broken, and a message was left on the windshield. Gossip lawyer pays a high price. Daniel also began receiving anonymous threats by phone. Men would call in the dead of night, saying he was messing with something dangerous, and that he should go back to where he came from before he regretted it. Thomas, ironically, seemed the least psychologically affected by the intimidation. At 65, he had already been through so many hardships in life that he faced the situation with a serenity that impressed his daughter. Rebecca, my whole life I suffered because of this injustice, without even knowing it existed. Now that I know the truth, I won't hide. Her father's determination gave Rebecca the strength to continue. She temporarily moved her base to St. Benedict Fields, renting a small commercial room to serve as an office. Daniel did the same, formalizing the partnership that had become increasingly solid. The class action lawsuit progressed, but faced constant obstacles. At every hearing, Colonel Vincent's lawyers filed new appeals, new allegations, new documents trying to contradict the evidence presented by the claimant families. Dr. Christopher Montrose proved to be a formidable opponent. He managed to question the authenticity of some secondary documents, forced lengthy expert analyses on irrelevant evidence, and exploited every possible procedural loophole to prolong the trial. But Daniel knew similar tactics and developed effective counter-strategies. For every dilatory appeal, he filed a well-founded reply. For every challenge, he had additional evidence. His local experience combined with Rebecca's legal knowledge formed a competent team. The turning point came when they managed to locate a document neither side had considered before. Daniel remembered that his grandfather had mentioned records kept at the local church and requested permission to examine the parish archives. The current parish priest, Father Michael, was a young man who had arrived in town a few years earlier and had no connection to the families involved in the dispute. He allowed access to the historical archives, which were stored in a damp church basement. Among books of birth, marriage, and death records, Daniel found something extraordinary: a parish property register book listing donations and transactions involving land in the region. In an entry from 1953, he found a record of a donation made by William Harrison, Thomas's great-grandfather, to the church. But what caught his attention was a marginal note made by the parish priest at the time. Suspicious donation. Mr. William claims he was coerced into signing. Request episcopal investigation. The record showed that even the church had noticed irregularities at the time, but apparently no investigation was conducted. It was further evidence that local authorities were aware of the fraud, but chose to ignore it. With this new evidence, Rebecca and Daniel requested an urgent hearing with the judge overseeing the case. Dr. Charles Edward Richardson was an experienced magistrate known for his independence and technical rigor. He had been assigned to the case specifically because he had no local ties that could compromise his impartiality. At the hearing, Rebecca presented all the collected evidence chronologically: the original documents found by Thomas, the copies kept by Daniel's grandfather, the altered records from the county clerk's office, and now the parish priest's note confirming coercion. Dr. Richardson examined each document carefully, asking technical questions that demonstrated his mastery of property law. After 2 hours of analysis, he made an observation that changed the course of the entire proceeding. Dr. Rebecca, Dr. Daniel, given the evidence presented, I see no way to question the legitimacy of the original property of the Harrison family and the other claimant families. The question now is determining the appropriate form of restitution. Dr. Christopher Montrose tried to argue that decades of peaceful possession and improvements made created rights for the current occupants, but the judge was categorical. Dr. Montrose, possession based on fraudulent documents can never be considered peaceful or in good faith. Your claims of adverse possession do not hold. The trial for the main action was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Rebecca knew that would be the definitive hearing, where the whole truth would finally come to light publicly. In the weeks leading up to the trial, the town lived in a climate of tension. Business owners feared that a ruling in favor of the claimant families would set a precedent that would destabilize the entire local economy. Employees of the shopping center worried about the possibility of losing their jobs. Colonel Vincent made a final attempt to manipulate public opinion, giving interviews in the local newspapers, where he presented himself as a businessman who had invested in good faith in the region and was now being persecuted by opportunists trying to take advantage of old documents. Rebecca responded through the same press, explaining in a didactic manner how the fraud had worked and how entire families had been harmed for decades. Daniel organized a legal volunteer effort to clarify the public's doubts about rural property issues. On the day of the trial, the St. Benedict Fields courthouse was packed. Claimant families, business owners, onlookers, and journalists crammed into the courtroom and hallways. It was the most important case in the town's recent history. Dr. Richardson opened the session by explaining he would first hear the final arguments from the defense, then from the prosecution, and would then announce his decision. Dr. Montrose spoke for almost an hour, exploring technical aspects and trying to minimize the impact of the evidence presented. When it was Rebecca's turn, she chose a different approach. Instead of focusing only on the legal aspects, she spoke about the human dimension of the case. Your Honor, this is not just a case about rural properties. It is a case about justice, truth, and historical reparation. For decades, entire families lived in poverty, while others benefited from the proceeds of a crime. It is about the right of ordinary people not to be deceived by those who have more power and resources. She narrated Thomas's journey, showing how a hard-working man had spent his entire life struggling against difficulties he didn't even know were the result of a historical injustice. She spoke about other families who had lost their lands in the same way, and about how the discovery of the truth had given hope to people who no longer believed in justice. When she finished speaking, the silence in the room was absolute. Many people had tears in their eyes, including some court staff. Dr. Richardson withdrew to deliberate. He returned 2 hours later with a decision that would forever change the history of St. Benedict Fields. After careful analysis of all evidence presented, I declare the petitioner's claims to be valid. It is proven that there was illegal appropriation of rural properties through document fraud and corruption of public officials between 1950 and 1955. The murmur in the room was interrupted by the judge's gavel. I order the immediate restitution of the properties to their rightful owners, as well as payment of compensation for the profits gained during the period of illegal occupation. The decision was even more comprehensive than Rebecca had hoped. The judge not only recognized the family's right to their original properties, but also ordered the current occupants to pay for the profits obtained during decades of land exploitation. For Colonel Vincent and other involved businessmen, the decision meant not only the loss of the properties, but also the payment of multi-million-dollar compensations that could bankrupt them. Dr. Montrose immediately announced he would appeal the decision, but Dr. Richardson anticipated the move by ruling that appeals would not have suspensive effect. The properties were to be returned within 30 days, regardless of appeals. When they left the courthouse, Rebecca and Thomas were surrounded by journalists and supporters. The elderly farmer, who had begun that journey begging God for food, was now surrounded by people wanting to hear his story. "Mr. Thomas, how do you feel knowing you've recovered your family's land?" asked a reporter. Thomas looked at the people around him, then at Rebecca, and smiled. "I feel grateful. Grateful to have discovered the truth, grateful to have a courageous daughter, and grateful to live in a country where justice still exists for simple people like me." But the victory in court was only the beginning of a new phase of challenges. The 30 days set by the judge for the restitution of the properties became a period of intense negotiation and planning. Colonel Vincent and other businessmen, realizing they could not overturn the court decision, changed their strategy. Instead of continuing to fight the decision, they began negotiating ways to implement it that would be less destructive to the local economy. The first proposal came from a mediator hired by the businessmen themselves. They suggested that the petitioner families receive financial compensation equivalent to the value of the land, but allow the current businesses to continue operating in their established locations. Rebecca initially rejected the proposal, but Thomas asked to analyze it more carefully. During a three-way conversation in the kitchen of the house where it all began, the elderly farmer showed a wisdom that surprised his daughter. "Rebecca, our fight has always been for justice, not revenge. If we can get fair reparation and still help the town develop honestly, maybe it's better for everyone. But Father, they stole our land for decades. Why make things easier for them now? Because if we stay angry for the rest of our lives, they will have stolen more than our land. They will have stolen our peace too." Daniel agreed with Thomas's wisdom, but suggested a different approach. Instead of simply accepting financial compensation, he proposed creating a development model that would benefit both the rightful owners and the local community. The idea was to transform the current commercial center into a solidarity economy complex, where small rural producers from the region could sell directly to consumers. The current business owners would retain a stake in the businesses, but the wronged families would become majority partners. The proposal was presented at a public meeting in the town hall with participation from all involved parties. Thomas, who had never spoken in public beyond a few good mornings at church, surprised everyone with an emotional speech. "I could be angry at Colonel Vincent and the others for stealing our inheritance, but anger won't bring back the years my family spent without what was rightfully ours. What can bring something back is building a future where this never happens to anyone again." Thomas's proposal found unexpected support. Local merchants, who initially feared losing everything, realized the proposed model could actually strengthen the regional economy. Small rural producers who never had access to urban markets saw an opportunity to improve their income. Even some employees of the current commercial center showed interest, realizing they could become cooperative partners instead of just employees. Colonel Vincent, initially resistant, ended up accepting the proposal when he realized it was his only chance not to lose everything. In a public statement, he publicly acknowledged that his family had benefited from questionable actions in the past and committed to working toward reparation. "I can't change what my grandfather did, but I can help build a better future for this community," he declared in an interview with the local newspaper. The implementation process for the new model took 6 months and involved lawyers, economists, cooperative specialists, and rural development consultants. The old commercial center was gradually transformed into what would become known as the Earth Market, a complex combining direct sales of rural products, restaurants with regional food, a training center for farmers, and cultural spaces. Rebecca took on the legal coordination of the entire project, while Daniel specialized in rural community rights. Together, they created a model that drew attention from other regions of the country and even from international organizations interested in sustainable development. Thomas, who had begun the story begging for food, became a sort of informal mentor for other small farmers. His life experience and his serenity in the face of adversity made him a respected counselor. He helped resolve internal conflicts, advised on sustainable agricultural techniques, and, above all, reminded everyone of the importance of preserving dignity and justice in all transactions. The project was so successful that other towns in the region began implementing similar models. Rebecca was invited to give lectures on land conflict resolution and sustainable rural development. Daniel opened a law office specializing in agrarian rights and became a reference in the field. But the most important aspect of the transformation was personal. The relationship between Thomas and Rebecca, which had been destroyed by distrust and resentment, was reborn stronger than ever. Working together on the project, they discovered they had much more in common than they imagined. Rebecca decided to move permanently to St. Benedict Fields, buying a house near her father's property. For the first time in years, father and daughter dined together regularly, sharing not just meals but plans for the future. "Rebecca, your mother would be so proud to see what you've become," said Thomas one Sunday afternoon, as they watched the activity at the Earth Market. "She would be proud of both of us, Dad, of how we managed to turn an injustice into an opportunity for so many people." The Earth Market prospered beyond all expectations. Small farmers who previously struggled to sell their produce now had stable and decent income. Urban consumers discovered the quality of regional products, and what was once an ordinary commercial center transformed into a model of solidarity economy studied by researchers from various universities. 3 years after the day he found the chest buried behind the stone watering trough, Thomas was at the inauguration of a new wing of the Earth Market dedicated to regional crafts. By his side, Rebecca cut the symbolic ribbon as hundreds of people applauded. In that moment, looking at the crowd of farmers, merchants, consumers, and visitors from other towns, Thomas remembered the night he had knelt in the backyard begging God for food. His prayer had been answered in a way he could never have imagined. What began as a desperate plea from a starving man had turned into a quiet revolution that restored dignity not only to his family, but to an entire community. The discovery of the chest didn't just bring documents proving property rights, but revealed something far more valuable: the ability of ordinary people to turn injustice into opportunity when they work together for a common goal. Daniel, who was now considered part of the Harrison family, was planning to marry an agronomist who had moved to town to work on the project. The young lawyer, who had arrived timidly with his grandfather's documents, had become a respected leader in the community. Colonel Vincent, surprisingly, had adapted well to the new model. He discovered that being a minority partner in a prosperous and socially responsible enterprise was more rewarding than being the sole owner of questionable businesses. In private conversations, he admitted the process had taught him values he hadn't learned in decades of business life. The transformation wasn't limited to economic aspects. The town as a whole had developed a new identity based on cooperation, sustainability, and social justice. St. Benedict Fields became known nationally as an example of how communities can overcome historical conflicts and build a better future for everyone. The stone watering trough where Thomas found the chest was restored and turned into a small memorial. A bronze plaque briefly told the story of the discovery that changed everything, and the spot became a must-see for the many visitors who came to see the Earth Market. But for Thomas, the most important memorial wasn't made of bronze or stone. It was seeing his daughter working passionately on a project that benefited hundreds of families. It was watching young farmers learning sustainable techniques that would ensure the preservation of the land for future generations. It was knowing that his discovery had turned into hope for people who, like him, had lost faith in the possibility of justice. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. 6 months after the inauguration of the new wing of the Earth Market, Thomas received an unexpected invitation. The governor of Kentucky wanted to personally see the project and discuss the possibility of expanding the model to other regions of the state. The visit was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Rebecca helped her father choose his best outfit, a navy blue dress pants and a white shirt he had bought especially for the occasion. Thomas was nervous. He had never spoken with such an important official. "Dad, just be yourself. Just be—" "It was your authenticity that inspired all this transformation," Rebecca reassured him. The governor arrived accompanied by a delegation of secretaries and advisors, but showed genuine interest in learning every detail of the project. Thomas personally guided him through the Earth Market, explaining how it all began and introducing the farmers who now had their stalls there. "Mr. Thomas, how would you define what happened here?" asked the governor. Thomas reflected for a few moments before answering. "Governor, I'd say we discovered that true justice isn't just about getting what is rightfully ours. It's about using that right to create opportunities for everyone to grow together." The answer impressed the governor so much that he asked to repeat it at the press conference to be held at the end of the visit. Thomas's phrase was reproduced in newspapers across the country and became a sort of motto for the solidarity economy movement that was spreading throughout the United States. As a result of the visit, the state government created a program to support similar projects, offering technical and financial resources to communities that wanted to implement development models based on cooperation and sustainability. Rebecca was invited to coordinate the program at the state level, but preferred to continue working directly with St. Benedict Fields. Her experience had taught her that true transformations happen when you work close to people, not from distant government offices. Daniel accepted a position as a consultant for the program, traveling across the state to guide communities interested in the model. His experiences in St. Benedict Fields became case studies at universities and non-governmental organizations. The national repercussion of the project brought unexpected changes to Thomas's life. He began receiving invitations to speak at universities, conferences on rural development, and even at international events. Initially reluctant, he ended up accepting some invitations when he realized his story could inspire other people in similar situations. During a lecture at Kentucky State University, a student asked what he would say to someone going through difficulties and losing hope. "Son, I spent 65 years of my life suffering because of an injustice I didn't even know existed. When I discovered the truth, I could have gotten angry. I could have sought revenge. But I chose to use that discovery to build something better. Life always gives a new chance to those willing to work for it. The audience rose in prolonged applause. Videos of the lecture spread across social media and reached millions of views, turning Thomas into a national figure known for his simple and inspiring wisdom. But all this attention didn't change the essence of the man. Thomas still woke up before sunrise, tended to his small vegetable garden, and fed the animals he had managed to keep after the discovery of the documents. His simple routine was a constant reminder that true happiness doesn't depend on public recognition, but on the satisfaction of living according to one's own values. One morning, almost 4 years after the discovery that changed everything, Thomas was watering his garden when he saw an elderly woman approaching on the dirt road. She walked slowly, leaning on a cane, and carried a worn cloth bag. "Good morning," Thomas greeted. "Can I help you with something?" "Are you Thomas Harrison Mitchell, the one from the land story?" "Yes, ma'am, I am. Come in, let's have some coffee." The woman introduced herself as Antonia Mitchell, 78 years old, a resident of a neighboring town. She said she had seen a report about the St. Benedict Fields case and had come in person because she believed her family had also been victims of a similar fraud. "Mr. Thomas, my late husband always said our family had rights to some land here in the region, but he could never prove anything. After he died, I found some papers tucked away that might be important." Thomas called Rebecca, who was working in the office he maintained in the city. When Rebecca arrived and examined the documents Mrs. Antonia had brought, it became clear this was another case of the same fraud scheme that had harmed dozens of families. "Mrs. Antonia, these documents are very important. With the experience we have now, you can be sure we will help you recover your rights." Mrs. Antonia's case became the first in a new wave of discoveries. The impact of the success in St. Benedict Fields had encouraged other people to search for old documents stored in trunks, drawers, and attics. Each new discovery revealed more branches of the illegal land-grabbing scheme that had spread throughout the region. Daniel, who now had a team of young lawyers working with him, created a standardized protocol to investigate and prosecute these cases. The model developed in St. Benedict Fields was adapted for different situations, always prioritizing solutions that benefited both the legitimate owners and the local communities. Rebecca took on the coordination of an agrarian rights institute that was created to systematize and disseminate the knowledge gained through all these experiences. The institute began offering courses, consultations, and technical support for lawyers and community leaders from across the country. The Institute's work came to the attention of the United Nations, which invited Rebecca to present the United States model at an international conference on property rights and sustainable development. It was the first time she had traveled outside the country, and she was moved to see how her father's story had inspired similar projects in other parts of the world. When she returned from the conference, Rebecca found Thomas more thoughtful than usual. He was sitting on the porch, watching the activity at the earth market that could now be seen in the distance from his property. "Dad, is something wrong?" "Rebecca, I was thinking about your mother. How happy she would be to see all this we've managed to build. She would be very proud, Dad. You know what moves me the most? It's not the money we recovered nor the recognition we received. It's knowing that our struggle has helped so many other families avoid going through what we went through." Rebecca sat beside her father, and they watched the sunset together over the land they now knew was rightfully theirs, but which they had chosen to share with the entire community. "Dad, do you ever regret not just keeping the land and the money for our family?" Thomas smiled. "Rebecca, if we had done that, we would be rich, but we would be alone. The way we did it, we have something much more valuable, a family that extends throughout this community." That night, father and daughter dined together as they had every night for nearly 4 years. During the meal, they planned the next stages of the project and discussed the new cases that were emerging. But what made them happiest was the certainty that they had found not only justice for their own family, but a greater purpose that gave meaning to all the difficulties they had faced. Before sleeping, Thomas went to the spot where he had found the trunk that changed his life. The stone watering trough now had a small memorial plaque, but to him, it remained simply the place where his grandfather had hidden the truth, waiting for the day it could be revealed. Looking at the starry sky, he remembered the night he had knelt there begging God for food. His prayer had been answered in a way he could never have imagined. He received not only the food he needed to survive, but the opportunity to help hundreds of others find dignified sustenance and renewed hope. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered softly, "and thank you, Grandpa Walter, for keeping the truth for us." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the surrounding trees, as if it were a silent response to his words of gratitude. The next morning, Thomas woke with the feeling that a new chapter was beginning. Rebecca had received an invitation to coordinate a national land reform program based on the St. Benedict Fields model. Daniel was planning to expand his office to meet the growing demand for land regularization cases, and he himself had been invited to participate in a documentary about social transformation in the rural United States. But regardless of all these external developments, Thomas knew his life had already found its true purpose. Every day he could see the literal fruits of his discovery: farming families selling their products with dignity, young people learning sustainable cultivation techniques, and an entire community working in harmony for a better future. The man who had once begged for food now saw his table, and the tables of hundreds of other families, abundant not only with food, but with hope, justice, and solidarity. The hunger that had nearly destroyed him had transformed into shared abundance. And when people asked what the secret to his transformation had been, Thomas always gave the same simple answer: "We discovered that true wealth isn't in what we manage to keep just for ourselves, but in what we manage to build together with others." End of story. Now tell me, what did you think of this inspiring story of Mr. Thomas? Would you make the same decisions he did, choosing to share instead of keeping everything for yourself? Leave your honest opinion in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Thank you so much for your company on this emotional journey. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other stories that touch the heart.